Hi, everyone. Welcome to Agribusiness Global Live. My name is Renee Targus. I'm the editor for Agribusiness Global and your host for today's webinar, The Future of Adjuvants and Inerts. If you like these virtual events, we're having a virtual seminar on October 22nd. It's the Agribusiness Global Asia virtual seminar. It's about 3 hours where we do a deep dive into Asia's crop protection and biological markets. It's free and registration will be coming online in about 2 weeks. So look for that. Also, we're having our trade summit next week. So if you haven't registered already, please do. It's in Orlando, Florida. I'll be there. My team will be there, and it's a great chance to network and do business deals with people from all over the world. So we hope to see you there. You can scan that QR code, and it'll take you to the registration page. All right, that's it for the housekeeping. Now let me introduce our panelists for today. We've got Andrea Casira. She's Agro Market Manager for the Americas for Evonik. We also have Terry Abbott. He's the Senior Product Portfolio Manager for Adjuvants Unlimited. He's also Chairman for CPDA. And then we have Dr. Rufi Wang. He's a scientist, research and development, agricultural and food for Neurion. So welcome, everyone. So glad to have you here. We're going to just jump right into the conversation right away, and I'm going to just throw out the first question. And Rufe, I'd like you to be the first one to answer this one. What new developments, and we could talk about mergers and acquisition, partnerships, new products, whatever. What new developments are happening with adjuvants, especially with biologicals and sustainability?
Hello, everybody. Great to be here. So I'll just share some thoughts in the new development in this space. So I think in recent years, there's a lot of happening in the ag industry, including the pesticide formulation itself, but also the application technologies and as well as adjuvants. So I think a very good movement is that people start to realize that adjuvants are not just sporting chemicals, but really critical and practical tools we have so that we can have food security and meeting the tightening sustainability targets at the same time. So in terms of new adjuvant development, what I see is that using low toxicity and biodegradable components is really preferred as a starting material. If you can find the right functionality with those preferred chemicals, I think it's always the ideal way to go. And another hotspot in my view is the drift control. This is driven both by regulatory pressures, but also the practical reasons. So there are some already successful commercial products on the market, but I see that the companies are continuously improving their products by the convenience of use, the consistency, or just to bring new generations to replace or to have better performance. And also the drone application, when it grows and really happening, it also demands drift control, which I certainly think this is a positive push to the drift control research. And then I think I could not mention biologicals for agriculture. As a biologist by training, I'm quite optimistic about the potential of biologicals in agriculture. And I'm quite happy to see the fast development in this space and also the companies putting sizable investment in this area. And recently, I start to see that some truly exciting results that by using together with suitable adjuvant, the biopesticide can really deliver equivalent disease control efficacy as their chemical counterparts in the field conditions. So I think this is really a trend, really a way to go to pairing the biopesticide with their really a complementary adjuvant to deliver the good performance and to foster the sector to continuously grow.
Thank you so much. Terry, I'd like to send the question over to you, and let me repeat it. I think we've had several new people join. So the question is, what new developments are happening with adjuvants, especially with biologicals and sustainability?
Okay. And thank you very much. And I'll focus on the biological aspect of it. We're just starting to tease out the connections between the two from the formulations, because there is hundreds of biologicals out there, several companies, several startup companies coming up, and they're all looking to partner with companies such as ours or other suppliers, right? There's a lot of it going on. We're just scratching the surface on it and trying to figure out how does the adjuvants play with the biologicals and how can we improve them. We don't have a good answer for that yet, but we're working on it. We're doing some field trials and different things, and we're actually meeting. We have a whole team that are actually working on the biologicals, meeting with different startups and whatnot. We're trying to figure out how to improve the effectiveness of biologicals, because you can't just go out there, just like a chemistry herbicide application needs an adjuvant. Typically you're going to have the same need for the biologicals as well, and probably more so. So there's new products in this space with limited combinations that we can do, so we're just really trying to start to focus on that. Switching gears to the foliar applied biologicals, some of the adjuvants have shown some levels of improvement that we've done so far in our testing, but it's still very early in the stages of learning of what they can bring in terms of the improved control. Because it is complicated, just depending on the mechanism of the various biologicals, it will influence the outcome. And then also microbials. You got to screen all the different components to make sure they're not toxic to the microorganisms, and therefore you kill them and then there's no benefit to it, right? So it's tricky, it's complicated, but it's fun work at the same time. And then you got to balance, the last thing I'll say about it is you got to balance the efficacy versus the environmentalism, right? Because we talk about sustainability, that's a buzzword still. Really, truly, what is sustainability? It means different things to different people, to different companies. Well, right now, what we want to do is we want to make sure we're focused on it, and that these biologicals will prove themselves out to be beneficial to the growers, which is ultimately who we're all working for.
Right. Just a follow-up question to yours. So, you said there's a lot of experimenting going on in research. How long do you see before, like how many years before you feel like the adjuvants will be able to support biologicals?
That's a loaded question, Renee. That's a great question. I wish I had a straightforward answer. It depends.
Mhm.
Because some of them are more complex than others. I would say I would hope that we start to see something break here in the next couple of years, but I couldn't promise anything.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Andrea, I'm going to put the question to you. We still have some people joining, so I'm going to repeat the question. What new developments are happening with adjuvants, especially with biologicals and sustainability?
Well, I think as Terry mentioned, biological space is part of, or it can be divided in many different categories. So I think it's really hard to tackle everything at the same time. On the Evonik side, we've been working for several years on the microbial subcategory of biologicals, helping our customers in terms of extending the shelf life of the product, which is one of the key aspects and challenges in biologicals, and also, as Terry mentioned, performance, right? How can adjuvants, increase the performance so that we can have good results on the field? So I think there's a lot of challenges on biologicals. I think that the industry was like super excited 5 years ago. I think everybody thought that things were going to go really fast, but I think the more we look into this space and the more we research and all of the companies do work, I think the more challenges arise, not only on the formulation side, right, starting with like biocompatibility, but also on the application side, right, especially on microbials. In today's day, you have to apply microbials under specific circumstances because, for example, too much sun will kill them, too little sun will not make them thrive. So I think there's a lot of things or aspect that the industry is trying to solve in terms of challenges. And I think you see a lot of companies recently, and probably every week, I see headlines about companies partnering with other companies, from like big companies investing in smaller companies, startups, partnering with universities. And I see primarily companies out of Europe, some companies out of Israel, Japan and the US primarily looking to expand these partnerships and potential opportunities to develop, new products to complement each other on the commercial and distribution side, and to try to, tackle this market. Particularly, I think the trends, primarily driven by the European market, all focus on, biodegradability, bio-based products. We've come up with some of them within our portfolio, Breakthrough SP133, SF420. So I think there's also a lot of exploration into that fermentation, right, process. And I do see quite a bit of these pushed by, I guess, the final consumers that, are getting a little more knowledgeable or wanting to know where the food sources are coming from. And also from regulation, right? I think there's quite a bit of changing in the industry when regulations change. So I think all of the companies are looking to partner, right, to support, other companies, customers. How can we together, tackle the challenges and be able to have biologicals as a component of the crop protection management in a way that we can use the resources in a more effective way.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity in this area, though, along with some, drone formulation that we'll talk about soon. But let's, you mentioned regulations. So, Rufe, this question will go back to you. What regulation issues are adjuvant companies facing? And you could take, North America, South America, Europe, Asia, whatever area you're comfortable discussing. But what issues are these companies facing when trying to bring new products to market?
Yes, so I can share a little bit of my thoughts. So I think, yeah, obviously, ag industry is highly regulated, but for the pesticide, I think we could agree that it's highly regulated, but also in a more consistent manner. But for adjuvant, I think it's a quite different. So there seems no consensus about the classification, also the registration process in different regions for adjuvants products. So we see that the lack of harmonization in the process of registration and regulation is a big issue for adjuvant companies. And there's significant differences exist between regions, and also the requirement for data to register is vary greatly in both scope and also the level of the data stringency. So I would take example for tank mix adjuvant. I think just in my overview, I think tank mix adjuvant is in the US, it's relatively straightforward to register. However, in the EU markets, you have to register tank mix adjuvant country by country. This is beyond the EU level approval. So this type of national authorization really adds a lot of complexity to this process. So it's make it really hard to deploy or introduce any new products in these markets.
Thank you. And Thierry, I'll send this one over to you. And I know you just, if our audience didn't know, Thierry just spoke in front of Congress last week, addressing some regulations with EPA and their backlog. So Thierry, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Well, and that's definitely on the inert side and the pesticide where the backlog is occurring in with the Office of Pesticide Programs and what the funding we were asking and advocating as CPDA. As far as North America, California and Washington, and now Maine is starting to get into it. I believe there's 10 states that are regulated with adjuvants. The most stringent one is California by far, because they view adjuvants and regulate them as pesticides. So they do have a lot more stringent regulations and hoops that you got to go through. Not that they're unwarranted, but it makes it difficult and costly to get a new adjuvant in the state, from the field development, field trials that they require to get it. They do have some fast tracks in AB 1011 where you can do that and cite a like product, but there again, it takes time. And to get a new adjuvant in the state of California, probably upwards of 2 years. just in my personal experience with a distributor I used to be with. And that limits the growth of potential in those particular states, right? And I don't see this changing. I think, to quote a colleague of mine, Dr. Kevin Crosby, this is the last, today is the least regulated day that we'll see in our lifetime, right? It's going to continue to get worse, and we're going to have to figure out how to play within that. I'll touch on the ESA, Endangered Species Act, and what's going on with there. You got buffers that are going to be required across the states, and they're still sorting that out. They did 3 strategies. They've already done the herbicide strategy and insecticide strategy, and they'll be working on the fungicide strategy. And all those are supposed to be more or less cohesive, but there is various differences within them. But we at CPDA have been working with the member companies such as mine and trying to get data to give an alternative. When they first came out with this idea and what they were doing, they didn't even list adjuvants as a mitigation option. And when I say adjuvants, I'm talking specifically drift reduction agents. We have since got them to recognize that, albeit the first one is only oil emulsions for the herbicide, but we're working to try to get guar and polyacrylamides on there as well. So that is very fluid right now, and it's going to continue to change. And how are they going to implement it? How are they going to regulate it? And how are the states going to receive it and enforce it? So there's just a lot of things that are going through, much more detail than I can get into on this call. But and then I'll touch on South America. I'm not an expert, but we do sell some into South America as well. But they're lagging in the area of new innovation as far as adjuvants go. They've kind of stuck to their oils and MSOs, and those have worked for them. But there was a different regulatory environment a few years ago than there is today. So the tide is changing. They're figuring out. They want to look at the APE, MPE free, which is what the European Union has done, as well as I believe Canada, and there's a few others that are leaning towards that. It's rumored that South America may put into place a regulatory system that mimics the current EU REACH program. Now, I can't necessarily confirm that, but that's what's rumored out there. And what actually happens is anybody's guess at this juncture here. And the biggest cost for South America to bring the new innovation, the biggest issue is the cost. You know, adding new chemistries to the 40 CFR list is pretty costly. So there's just a lot of things going on that affect the regulatory issues.
Definitely. Andrea, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, in Canada, it's always the chicken or the egg, right? Because the government requires, for companies, adjuvant companies, to have a customer interested in buying the product, but then customers want to look at products that are already registered. So it's always like a little bit tricky. For the Latin American market, besides Mexico, Peru, and Brazil, who do not require adjuvant registration, the rest of the countries, depending or have their own checklist and regulatory requirements. Some of them overlap, some other don't. And there's also, there can be constant change on the regulations in Latin America. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to keep track of that. The requirements vary per country. Usually at registration, once you have the dossier together and submit it, might take between a year and a little more than 2 years to get the registration granted. And if your product or adjuvant is a simple molecule, right? If it's one of more on the commodity side, it's usually pretty straightforward. But when you start getting into more specialized molecules that don't fit exactly the framework or the checklist that authorities are requiring, it becomes a little more tricky, right? Some authorities are willing to sit down with you for you to explain the molecule and find a way to present the document that is needed in order to follow the registration. In others, it's harder. Sometimes also with more advanced and specialist molecules, as part of the requirements requested in Latin America, are usually GLP studies. So some of the labs are not certified on that specific methodology that you might need. So that's sometimes challenging. Governments sometimes need you to do testing or data through government authorized labs. And again, that's sometimes an issue because those labs might not have the equipment to conduct those testings or the methodology to do that. So it can get a little bit tricky as you're outside of that window of more commoditized products in Latin America. I think what I've seen also recently, and not only in Latin America, but also globally, is I think there's a trend from proposals from different people, groups, organizations to simplify the process for biological products. I think globally there's people are seeing value on that. I think it's going to take a while to come up with new regulations or a fast track for biologicals. Some countries are more advanced on that than others, but it's something that is probably going to continue to evolve in the next year. And hopefully this will bring a faster pathway for a lot of companies that want to register more sustainable, bio-based, biodegradable molecules in the countries. And then for Asia, I think it's similar to Latin America. Each country has its own set of rules. Some are easier to navigate, some other are harder. I was just reading an article that, for example, in Thailand, no new active ingredient has been registered in 7 years. So just to give you an insight that in some of these countries is really hard. And another challenge that sometimes we face as a company with global presence is that the requirements that might be requested in one country, when you're trying to register a product manufactured in another country, they might request documents that are not non-existent in the country where you make those materials. So sometimes you have to get a little creative, talk to your regulatory team, talk to the authorities to try to find ways to meet what is requested in order to have registrations go through.
Yeah, it's definitely, and especially with the different languages and registration in different languages. I know when we've talked to crop protection, they're like definitely get somebody in the country who can help you navigate those registrations. All right. For my next question, it's kind of the whole theme about what this webinar is about. It's what does the future of research and development for adjuvants and inerts look like in the next 5 years? So Rufe, we'll start with you and kind of go around again.
Yeah, sure. I think we can see that the adjuvant sector is growing faster than the overall ag industry. So because of that, I would expect in the coming years, more resources will be put available for adjuvant and inert research and development. And also because of that, then those more advanced technology like equipment, methodologies, and also the big scale trial program used for active ingredient research could be also make available for adjuvant studies. And because those are really powerful tools, and now I think it makes sense to really use it also for adjuvant. And then when we collect enough data, when the data amount accumulates and reach a threshold, then I think integrating with artificial intelligence in the research and making it faster would make sense. So altogether, I think this need investment, need a resource, and if the adjuvant markets continue to grow, I think this is definitely in a trend. And with those advanced technique packaged together, I think it will make us really be able to study the mechanisms of adjuvancy functionalities, and also will accelerate the research development. And then I think also a lot of the R&D program will be driven by regulatory pressures. Like in Europe, we are really under the pressure of fighting microplastic replacement by 2030. So a lot of our innovation program is already spurred on to really fight the alternative for this space. So we are working on microplastic-free foliar stickers, rain fastness agents, encapsulations, and seed coater, etc., etc. So I think it's remain a big chunk of our innovation program. So we hope, yes, we can deliver by the time and to fulfill the gap coming. And I think another probably thing I should mention is also the precision spraying is coming either by drone or by smart sprayer on the ground. Anyway, I think the spraying pattern or the kind of requirement would be different from the previous type of sprayers. So those, I think, for those type of precision farming, then the clear or adjuvants with clear mode of action would definitely help, because I believe that when you need to cope with different situation with precision delivers, the adjuvants with clear mode of action could definitely ease the selection of the right functionalities. And last but not least, I think since the focus of ag companies on biologicals, I would expect a lot of complementary or specialty adjuvant designed to enhance bioefficacy of a biopesticide, also for extending the shelf life of those type of products would be really pop up. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. I was going to have a follow-up question for you. You said the adjuvants in Inerts was really growing. Do you think that's because of ag tech, or what do you attribute that growth to?
I think one is probably doing innovation in a pesticide is too costly and too time consuming. So it's relatively easy to find really innovation, new evolution in the adjuvant side. So that's what I believe. And I think also now we know more and more about the kind of the interaction of surfactant and plant and environments and plants. So I think yeah, as Terry said, we are scratching the surface, but I think we are in the right track to really connect, making dots connected, so we can really help the active ingredient to be delivered in the right time, right position of the plants by using the right surfactants combinations.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, Terry, I'm sending the question over to you. What does the future look like?
Well, I think, and the touch on Rafi said, the biologicals, insecticides, fungicides, they're all poised to grow with an adjuvant with them. Think about tar spot in the US and a devastating disease in corn. And they're doing a lot more fungicide treatments over the top of corn. And we've got to do the research right. We don't want to inflame the arrested ear syndrome, right, which has gone back and forth debate, but we're really doing some research there. I know the industry is. A lot of the reasons is the see and spray, the different application types that he mentioned. That's going to drive a lot of it. And then the reductions of pesticides, or the pounds of pesticide that are going to be allowed to be put down on a crop in a given year. And there's a double-edged sword there, because with the reduced pesticide usage becoming mandatory, you've got resistance that continues to grow. I lived it when I was at DuPont Crop Protection, right? The sulfonylureas, the resistance there, I've seen it in my career, the glufosinate, and you've seen some dicamba. I don't think there's an active ingredient that hasn't had something somewhere in certain geography. It may not be widespread, but that's going to come if we don't get this figured out, right? And a big part of it is the adjuvant added to the tank. We're not going to overcome the resistance. The pesticide is doing the work, but a dead weed doesn't reproduce, right? So we need to make sure we're getting a thorough kill on the weeds so they don't have a chance to develop any tolerance or resistance. And then we also want to understand, and I think we're going to need to understand the effects and the mechanical inputs on adjuvants. How is that going to, with the pulse modulation system sprayer types, right? The see and spray, all that, how does that affect the mechanisms of the adjuvant, and how much demand does that put on it as you're doing a spray across the field here? So I think a lot of that, in terms of the inerts, they've always been registered and regulated for as long as I know. And it's getting harder to come up with newer types of chemistry. They've been around since the mid 1940s. So harder to find, more expensive with every passing year. And then you get fully loaded, which there's only so much headspace in a jug, right? So as you get more tech in there, that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for the surfactant package, which is going to help make it work and help the compatibility of it. and get the chemistries to actually play nice together, is what I'll put it, in one jug here. So there's just a lot of challenges, a lot of good challenges. It keeps, I call it job security. So, but I'm pretty excited for the future of adjuvants and the crop protection industry as a whole.
Okay, thank you, Terry. Yeah, I know it seems like there's, and we'll get to the ag tech in the next question, but it seems like there's a lot of, from what I'm hearing, a lot of opportunities for adjuvants and inerts, with ag tech kind of moving into being increasing in adoption. But we'll talk about that next. Andrea, did you want to add anything to this question?
No, just that adjuvant companies are really accompanying the changes, right, in the industry. As you know, our colleagues here in the panel mentioned, I think that formulation challenges, having more active ingredients in your tank mix, different things, makes it a little bit more challenging, right, to find the right adjuvant that's able to make everything work synergistically. So I think there's a bright future for adjuvants, as the colleagues have mentioned, new spaces, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to really contribute on the biological space.
Great, thank you. All right, so this question I'm very curious to hear about because I keep hearing about drone formulation with adjuvants, how there's this great opportunity, how nobody's really doing anything about it. So I'd really like to get all of your perspectives on this to give me a little bit more clarity on this. So, Rufe, what is your take on, what's happening with drone formulation with adjuvants?
I think before mentioning the formulation side, I would like just touch upon the fast development of drone itself. So if you look at the new generation of drone, they are so powerful, so smarter. So and they keep evolving, and just I think it's an efficiency gain by using drone instead of the traditional sprayer. I think it's just enormous. So I think people will get used to use drone and harder to get back to the old tools. So it will quickly grow still in China, in Asia, but also in South America, to some extent, maybe also in the United States and Europe. So definitely this is a big opportunity and there's a big need for the right adjuvant to it. So I think because the drone is changing so much, but probably principle needed from adjuvant is because of the low volume application, and also it's a rather faster moving the sprayer. So those principal functionalities from adjuvants could be compatibilizers and stakers better, and maybe humectant as well, because it's spraying from a higher altitude heights, so you need them to make sure the droplets remain and then they can add to the targets. So those, I think, the basic functionalities, no matter how drone changes or how the nozzle changes, those are the things I think will remain relevant for the coming years. But I would also think the adjuvant companies like us really need to watch out and also adapt to the new or fast growing drone technology and to really matching their development with our chemistry.
Yeah, I think, from what I'm hearing, it's like there's this opportunity, but it's almost like companies don't want to dive in because they want to see how much the adoption happens, but the adoption of ag tech is happening. So, Terry, what's your take on this?
Well, I would say, first of all, the real estate in the tank is really expensive, right? Because you're using really, really low concentrations of it. And then the key question is, how do you get in the tank? Because right now, conventional adjuvants are not designed for the drones as it stands today. When I was at my previous role here and just learning what we were, because drones were just coming on and a lot of people were looking at it, we're working with a lot of suppliers. Everybody was scrambling trying to figure it out. We were working with Steve Lee at the University of Auburn. He's one of the renowned experts here in the US and across the world. It's just understanding the effects the adjuvant can make and do as it's going across there, because you got the atomizers, right? Different nozzle technologies. And like Rufi said, it's the technology is changing quickly within the drone space. And if you don't stay with it, you're going to get left behind. almost kind of like hybrids of corn, right? If you're out of it for about 2 or 3 years, things change. Same here. And I just think it's something that we're going to have to address and understand, because it's not going away. Other countries are using it very successfully. The US is coming along. We'll see how they go. I know there's swarms of drones and different things that they're looking at, and to effectively apply, say, a 120-acre field, right? I know over in some of the Asian markets where the fields are much, much, much smaller, it makes a lot of sense, but it's not going away. We just need to get in front of it and figure it out. But we are working with that. And you really want good coverage, right? That's the ultimate key. And so how do you do that? Do you look at the silicones, the trioxylins, right? All of that, lots of things that we're exploring. So
why, maybe you could help me with this question. Why is it something that companies are exploring, but it doesn't seem like any companies really kind of going at it? Like what seems to be the hesitation, would you say?
I would say it's a great question. I don't know if I have a good answer, but I'll try to answer it. I think the hesitation is obviously the amount of product that are going to get used is relatively small. And then you've got other acres and different crops and whatnot. It's a matter of balancing act on what's the return on investment here, right? You still got the aerial, the fixed wing, the helicopter, rotary, and all that. Those aren't going to go away. It's going to be complementary to it, because there's a lot of places those type of application equipment can't get into that a drone is perfectly suited for. So I just think it's probably dipping the toe in the water, because they're trying to understand it and what value it's going to bring for not only their business but their growers.
Okay, so it's still an area of opportunity in the future. Andrea,
Absolutely.
Yeah, Andrea, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, as they mentioned, there are additional variables, right, that you have to consider when it comes to drones. There are a lot of challenges, but we've seen quite a bit of success with, a couple of our products, particularly tested in the Asian market. That is, as we all know, more developed. Just to give some reference to the audience, there are around 250,000 drones, operating in China, 190,000 hectares of drones in Japan, being treated with this mode. While in Brazil, which is probably the most advanced Latin American market on this topic, they operate around 35,000 drones. So I think, as our colleague said, it's something that it's growing. I mean, I think it's already established in Asia, in the bigger markets. Vietnam already sprays 70% of their rice crops via drones. In Latin America, I think Brazil is probably the country that is already working with drones. The rest of Latin America, Argentina is just starting to talk about it. In the US, I think Terry already mentioned the challenges. So I think this is going to be a space that is going to continue to evolve. I think there's challenges on standardizing solutions, right? Because as they mentioned, you have different variables. But I think there's some prototypes that look promising for these type of applications, and I think that the applicators are going to see some good products coming out in the next few years.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so my final question before we start taking questions from the audience. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A chat at the bottom. Final question for our panelists is, what three challenges are the adjuvants market facing right now, and what are the solutions? Rufe, you'll want to start with that?
Yep. I think right now we see economic slowdown. So I think that's probably the first challenge I will put. Because of that, I think farmers will have less available cash to use to buy additional tools. So for some, maybe adjuvant is not on their must-to-buy list. So I think that's the challenge one. And as that puts a pressure to the industry, but I guess what we can do is really continuously generating the relevant data for the users and create compelling user cases to repeatedly show to farmers that using the adjuvant can really improve your return on investment. So that's something you should definitely consider. I think challenge two is, I think, it's regulation. It's regulation, complexity, and fragmentation. So as we discussed already, I think it's some people review adjuvants are inerts, some are consider to regulate them as similar as the pesticides. This is a huge gap in between. And just take tank mix adjuvant again in Europe. So this type of national registration model, I think, is really really make it delay or even impossible to deploy some new product in certain countries. So I guess, yeah, it's probably for this, it's really tricky. But I guess what we can do is we also need to bring the strong data and the scientific data to compete, to repeat the message to the regulators that we have to innovate and adapt to those adjuvants. That's, I think, probably the easiest way that we can get our sustainability targets meet and have our food production sufficiently secured. And I think lastly, I would just mention, I think nowadays adjuvants become more and more powerful, but also complicated. So it's also a lot of products to choose for farmers. I'm just thinking from my perspective, it's not easy to the end users to select the right product for the right application. So I think probably Adjuvant are limited. Other adjuvant companies, they probably already do this to have a kind of a user-friendly selector, some AI-backed selectors to really help the farmers to choose and to guide them through the blending process. So just to improve the user experiences, so let them easier to adapt with adjuvants. So that's my take.
Great, thank you. Yeah, education I think is huge, especially with biologicals. I think that's a really key part of any sort of marketing plan. Thierry, did you want to add to this?
Sure. I'll just start off with, well, since he had talked about regulations, that's absolutely one of the number ones here, and they're not going away. And it's finding ways to work within the system, which is going to be challenging, but not insurmountable. But I'll add on to that costly registrations, right? We need to streamline the process and think about personal care and ag, right? There's some crossover there with the different surfactants and whatnot. I think regulators need to make it easier because you can actually apply it on your person, right, your skin. But when it comes to ag, they want all this data where some of the data was already there. We really just need to see if we can't get the regulators to understand that and allow that. So non-use is a big one. The untreated acre, right? I talk about that. Farmers don't fully use the adjuvants with all pesticide applications, which is creating issues. Talking about resistance, what I said earlier in the conversation here. How do we address that? And, going back to my market research that I've done over my career is growers, that's the last thing they're thinking about is in what they're going to add to their tank as far as an adjuvant goes. They're thinking about the rent, their fertilizers, their labor, go down the list, all the different inputs that goes into farming. That's the last one. But we need to educate the retailers and their sales agronomists, the ones that are actually out there making the recommendations. So I see that's where we could create a solution to the problem here. I don't know if we'll fully ever alleviate it, but we can gain on it. And ESA is going to bring some light to it too, right? The problem is if you ask a grower, and I have some farmers in my family, I asked them, have you heard of ESA? And they have not. So there's some education that's going to be necessary for everybody to understand and get on board. The last one I'll say is the innovation. And it's back to what hasn't been made since the inception of adjuvant markets. Not saying we can't do that, but it's going to be a challenge, right? You're asking for challenges, and how do we address it? We need companies to step up and really look at different molecules. How does this one interact with this one? Is there synergism? Because we could use some new tools in the toolbox.
Yeah, definitely. I know I hear that the new tools in the toolbox because of all the banning that's happening. So, Andrea, did you want to add anything?
I mean, I couldn't agree more with regulatory pressure, educational side. The majority of the countries in the world, we still need to do a lot of efforts for growers to understand what's the value of adjuvants and how can that benefit them. And tied to the R&D part is also price pressure, right? So when you have cost rising on, how expensive it is and complex to register products, R&D of new molecules, new things, the educational aspect. And then we've seen in a lot of markets that there's a lot of price pressure. And as mentioned, adjuvants usually are not on the top priority, at least for the growers. So those are the challenges that I think we'll continue to face.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right, we do have some questions from our audience. So I'm going to put this first question out there. Nanotechnology is not new, but are you seeing advancements in the nanotechnology space as an exciting area? And does adjuvant and compatibility increase efficacy with nanoparticles as much as normal component materials? Who would like to take that question? Rufe?
Yeah, I think we saw some review in the past. The nano will, in principle, make it more efficient because you have a smaller sizes, so you have a more chemical activity with your substances. So I think there's probably a lot of opportunity here. At the same time, I think it's also probably it's a bit harder to push because the regulation, I would consider some regulation hurdles here if we really want to kind of push a full blow of nanotechnology here. I think it's
Yeah.
that's what I think now.
Yeah. Terry or Andrea, did you have anything to add to that?
I've just, in the last 10, 15 years, heard about nanotechnology multiple times, right? I have yet to see it prove itself out. So we'll see. But I think if it does, the regulatory pressures and like I think we talked about microplastics, right? Different things as you get things smaller, the regulators are paying attention to that, at least in the US. And they're saying, we need to make sure that we're not, it's about public health. Right. So they're really watching that closely.
Right. Okay. Andrea, did you have anything you wanted to add or?
No, the challenge is going to be on the regulatory side. The smaller the particle, where does that go? Can it translocate and how does that affect, other
Definitely.
things?
Definitely. All right. Thank you. All right. Next question. Can you provide any examples of adjuvants that are facing regulatory challenges or come with environment health concerns that have been really difficult to find a viable replacement for? Anybody want to take that one? And I can read the question if you need me to reread it.
Read it one more time.
Sure.
If you wouldn't mind. Sorry, Andrea.
No, go ahead. Go ahead,
Okay.
Renee.
Can you provide any examples of adjuvants that are facing regulatory challenges or come with environmental health concerns that have been really difficult to find a viable replacement for? So I think what they're saying is, are there any adjuvants on the market right now that they're getting banned or they're facing a lot of challenges getting to market, and is there a viable replacement for them?
Well, I think the trend in Europe is bio-based, biodegradable, right? More sustainable, and it's harder to go through the process of registration. Some older molecules, and depending on the country, some countries are more advanced, I guess, in a way. I mean, MPEs are banned, right, in Europe, but in Latin America, they still use them. So I think it really varies per country and region. We see more stringent regulations coming out from Europe that now seem to be, could potentially be adopted in China and other countries. But so far, I cannot think of something that could not be replaced. I think there's pressure, but I think there's still some variety on technologies that can support growers on their needs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But I think what you're saying too is maybe to watch the EU market. I know that a lot of times that what's banned there or is kind of mimicked in other countries around the world. So it's a good place to sort of watch to see where there might be more opportunities. Terry, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, Renee, so I'll add to that, but everything can be replaceable, right? There's various products that can fit. there's not one that it's the silver bullet, I'll call it, right? So I think there's opportunities out there, and if one is under regulatory pressure or whatever pressure it's under, right, you have something that a grower can use, and one that you can recommend to that grower for their use as well. But you talked about, Andrea referenced the MPEs, right? Although they're banned in certain countries, other countries are still using them. So there's just, it varies depending on by country. So, but you're going to see just continued pressure just on any chemistry. But there's always an alternative somewhere.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next question, are regulations on the adjuvants themselves or also on adjuvant pesticide combinations?
I mean, if you're registering an adjuvant per se, that's, one line of registration, right? When you're gonna register a tank mix adjuvant, and then you could potentially have some adjuvants as components of the pesticide formulation, and that would go with the pesticide registration. They would, declare part of the formulation, the adjuvant that is within the formulation. So those are two different, I guess, routes. One, if you're additive in the INCAN formulation, and then you'll go through the pesticide pathway. If you are registering a standalone adjuvant, then you will use the adjuvant regulations. And I think that's pretty standard globally. And in some countries, you don't need registrations for tank mix adjuvants. Not many, but some.
All right, great. Thank you. Rufe or Terry, did you want to add anything to that?
I just would, Andrew is right. I think it's pretty streamlined across. I've dealt with Guatemala. There's different compositions they want to know and whatnot. But yeah, I think she hit it.
What I know for Europe, I think it's not all of them, but a few of the countries, they want a data pair of your pesticide and your adjuvant, what you claim, which pesticide you should use. So I think in certain countries there are such restrictive requirements for data, which I think is really, really hard. You hardly to introduce any new product there.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, next question. Do you see much activity in the use of encapsulation to increase efficacy or product or to protect the biological material? So let me read that again since I kind of botched it up. Do you see much activity in the use of encapsulation to increase efficacy or protect the biological material? Anybody want to take that one?
Well, I guess the biggest challenge with encapsulation is microplastic free, right? I think companies are trying to find ways of encapsulating and meeting, the regulatory requirements that are primarily driven at this time from Europe. So I think that's something that companies are being challenged to find other chemistries that could do the job. But I think the pressure comes from, the microplastics that used to be, I guess, the chemistry that was used for those encapsulations for the most part.
Terry or Rufe? Did you want to add to that?
Probably primarily now is to find the replacement, so you can keep the microcapsule portfolio still available. So I think that's the primary goal for our researcher, to find an alternative way to make encapsulation. I think there's probably many companies are working on this, so I'm hopeful that there will be really smart way come out and that can replace the current polymer plastics, and then meanwhile maybe some really unique and innovative way of making encapsulation could potentially used to encapsulate like a water phase with the biologicals. Then yeah, I'm hopeful, and I think there could be potentials, but I haven't seen kind of concrete examples yet. Just very keep us watch on this area.
Okay, great. Thank you. Terry, did you have anything to add?
I just know encapsulation has been looked at for several years, right? I can go back in the history of my career, and encapsulation has come a long way from what it was. It's always about getting it to release at the appropriate time, right? With the biologicals, I don't have a whole lot to speak on that because I don't know. But I do know other companies that a lot of the larger major basics that have investments in the biologicals. I mean, I'm sure they're looking at encapsulation because they look at it for their regular active ingredients as well. We'll just see what happens.
Okay. All right, we've got two more questions. This question, what role can adjuvants play in aiding a reduced spray volume while maintaining spray quality and efficacy? And how does one quantify this? Is Rufe, is this something that you or Andrea, Terry, which one do you, Rufe?
Yeah, I think definitely anti-drift. So you get some more droplets landed successfully on the targets. And then from literature, I saw that the vetter, the spreader, those type will definitely help. So on literature, you see those low volume application if you use the strong vetters. And because also in a high concentration of surfactant, so it makes the spreading patterns different as compared with a general large volume application. So that is possible with lower volume, but with super strong spreading, you can achieve equivalent performance as in a high volume application. So I think those anti-drift and strong batter would be definitely helpful.
Okay, great. Terry or Andrea, did you want to add anything to that?
I would just say, I mean, deposition, it's all about getting the spray to the target, right? And getting the effectiveness, whether the carrier rate's 7 gallons per acre or whether it's 20. Now, some active ingredients respond better to more water. I think one glufosinate, when I first started, it was around 20 gallons per acre. I think they've allowed 15 now. But generally speaking, the basic manufacturers or the manufacturers of pesticides always like more water because they want that coverage, right? So.
Okay, I'm going to just jump to the last question because we've got 3 minutes left. Is a relative 2-year regulatory path to the California market was described earlier in the talk, and how would the use of a commercially available adjuvant in combination with an active ingredient impact that timeline? So the question is, it takes about 2 years, the regulatory path for adjuvants, but how long would that be extended, or if it was in combination with an active ingredient?
I don't know if I could speak to that. I mean, you'd have to ask DPR. so I don't know if there's not a standard, right? They give you somewhat of a guideline here. And when I say 2 years earlier in the conversation, that's generalized, right? That's not exactly you're going to get it on 2 years. It depends on what data and what register or they have reviewers and different stuff. I'm getting the terminology wrong, but I don't know the answer to that. That would be something they'd have to talk to California DPR.
Okay. Andrea, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or?
No, just how the question is written. If the active ingredient is already registered and the adjuvant is already registered, and you just time mix them, then you're good to go. If they're going to merge both, it might require a new registration, might be a new product. But yeah, as Terry mentioned, timeline's different per state, and sometimes also the request changes, and depending on the data that they might ask, that might take some time to gather or collect.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, that about ends our discussion. Thank you, Andrea, Terry, and Rufe for participating in this talk, and thank you to our audience for attending and sending us your questions. Again, a recording of this will be available in about 2 weeks' time. And so we hope to see you at our next webinar and hopefully to see you at the Trade Summit next week if possible. But thank you again, everyone.